Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program tonight in conversation with Linda Sarsour. This program was made possible with support from Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We thank Humanities for supplying us with the funding and the opportunity to engage our Arab community. My name is Karita Tinker, and I'm a library assistant here at the Anaheim Public Library. I also have Barbie McConnell with me, and she's a librarian also at the Anaheim Public Libraries. And we will be facilitating this conversation tonight. And Barbie has also been leading our book club. And we thank you for joining us and taking part in this critical conversation. This evening, we welcome Ms. Linda Sarsour. We will be discussing her 2020 autobiography, We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders, a memoir of love and resistance. Now, if you haven't read it yet, please check it out at the Anaheim Public Library or pick it up at Amazon or wherever books are sold. But before we proceed with the program, let me provide you with a bit of background on our esteemed guest. This bio is from Women's Media Center, and let's talk a little bit about Linda. Linda is a Palestinian Muslim American community activist. She's a freedom fighter, a mother of three. She's a self-proclaimed pure New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn. Linda destroys stereotypes of Muslim women while also treasuring her religious and ethnic heritage. She is a former executive director of the Arabic American Association of New York and co-founder of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change. Linda has been at the forefront of major civil rights campaigns, including calling for an end to unwarranted surveillance of New York's Muslim communities and ending police policies like stop and frisk. She's a member of the Justice League NYC, a leading New York force of activists, formerly incarcerated individuals and artists working to reform New York Police Department and the criminal justice system. Furthermore, Linda co-chaired the Women's March on Washington and March to Justice, a 250-mile journey on foot to deliver a justice package to end racial profiling. She has written for and has been featured in local, national, international media discussing the impact of domestic policies that target Arab and Muslim American communities and criminal justice issues and Middle East affairs. And again, we thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we're excited to have you. Thank you. How you doing tonight?
I'm alive and breathing, and I'm grateful to be here. And I'm really grateful to the Anaheim Public Library for inviting me here today, and more specifically for your work to build bridges and welcome our beautiful and very large and highly concentrated Arab American communities in the larger Anaheim area. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
It's been great having these programs, and we're thrilled to have you, Linda. Thank you. Starting with talking about your book, one of the questions we had was where did the title "We're Not Here to Be Bystanders" come about? Was it your first title, or did it come about later? What made you choose that title?
You know, Barbie, it's been one of my mantras ever since I became an organizer and watched my community become targets of the United States government in the aftermath of the horrific attacks of 9/11. And I kind of said that to myself one day. I'm like, we're not here to be bystanders. Like, we're not just here to watch injustice happen and just kind of go on with our lives. And when it really stuck with me was in 2017, there was an incident that happened in Oregon. If people remember, there was a young Muslim woman on a train, and 3 young men came to defend a woman who was being physically assaulted by a white man who actually had a knife. And 3 men were stabbed. 2 of them lost their lives. And I gave a speech at the CUNY Graduate Center to a graduation of students who had gotten their master's degree in public health. And it was kind of the theme of my speech. It was like, we are not here to be bystanders. You did not get a degree in public health to be bystanders and kind of giving people a kind of, call to action. And then immediately after that, I had gotten this book contract, and that really stood out to me. And I wanted a book that you walked by in the library, and even if you didn't open my book, even if you didn't buy my book, you saw the words, "We are not here to be bystanders." So that if that's the only thing you walked away with was the title, that really was good enough for me. And so that's why.
Are we still bystanders, in America after 2020?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I don't want to come here to be, as they say, Debbie Downer. But we have so much work to do for us all to embrace this concept of not being bystanders. We live in a country where, we still have racism. We still have homophobia and transphobia and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and sexism and ageism. And, we can sit here, ableism, and we kind of move some, but we don't move all the way. And oftentimes the reason why things like racism and anti-Black racism fester and continue to be systematic, things like sexism continues to be systematic, Islamophobia, etc., is because people are bystanders. It is people who have power over systems. And so when we continue to be bystanders, which oftentimes means being silent, it's not that we necessarily are the perpetrators of racism, or we may not be ourselves engaging in racist activity, but at the same time, if we're silent in the face of it, then somehow I believe we are complicit. And so that is the idea of not being bystanders, of finding our role to play. Not everybody could play the same role. Some people are going to be educators, and some people are going to be activists and organizers. Other people are going to be philanthropists and support those who are on the front lines. We all have a role to play to eradicate the diseases of racism in America. But unfortunately, the silent majority has reigned for far too long. And if we want to eradicate these things, all of us, every single one of us, has to say to themselves and commit to saying, me, I'm not going to be a bystander. And so that's what kind of, I hope that my book at least sparks a little bit of that challenge in people.
I love that idea of having that message on the outside. So even if you don't read it or purchase it, you're still getting a message out. You talked in your book about you're wearing your hijab as a personal choice, that it was not necessarily something all of your family did. Since hijab is an outward display of a woman's identity or religion, sadly in America, that often brings negative attention. I know you said in your book that you were told that a family member told you to take it off after the events of 9/11. Has the situation gotten any better? Is that less of a place where you get negative attention?
I appreciate that question, Barbie, because right now it's hard for me to say that we've moved on. Just in the last 2 weeks, we've had a few incidents. We had an incident at the University of Maryland where a young woman was assaulted and her hijab was ripped off. She's a student at the University of Maryland. That just happened 2 weeks ago. About 2 weeks before that, there was a little girl who was 8 years old in New Jersey, who's a public school student, who went to school wearing her hijab. She was a young Black Muslim girl. And her white teacher actually pulled her hijab off while the little girl held her hijab down and started telling her, like, but your hair is really beautiful. Don't you want the other students to see your beautiful hair? And not allowing this child to try to explore her identity, to come to school. Maybe one day she wants to wear hijab. Maybe one day she doesn't want to wear hijab. This is a young child who's kind of developing in her age and trying to understand and explore who she is. And so we unfortunately have had multiple incidents just in a short period of time, particularly in our school systems, around hijab and allowing young Muslim women to kind of be unapologetically who they are. And what I will say to people about hijab is that, we tend to be a little hypocritical in America, the way we think about, agency. We talk a lot about choice and women's choice, and women have agency over their bodies, and women get to make choices. All of a sudden, a Muslim woman decides to wear a cloth on her head, and all of a sudden we don't have agency anymore. That description of agency is actually contrary to everything and antithetical to who we are. Why can't my hijab be a choice? And a woman who doesn't want to cover her hair be a choice as well? So for example, I have 4 sisters and none of my sisters wear hijab. It doesn't make them less Muslim than I. It doesn't make them more Muslim than I. It is a choice that they made not to wear hijab. And it is my choice to wear it. There's nothing that this hijab that is for me a part of my identity. Like when I walk out into the street or I go into a public place, people may not know I'm Palestinian. They probably will figure out I'm from Brooklyn, New York. That part I can't hide because the minute I open my mouth, that's pretty clear. But let's just say they didn't hear me speak. I'm a very ambiguous person. My name is Linda. I'm very fair skinned. But when I wear a hijab, when I walk into a place, the one thing you absolutely know about me is that I'm a Muslim woman. And that's important to who I am and the way I show up in the world. So I encourage people, or I welcome people to see hijab as part of the larger conversation on agency. And now I'll just give, because I'm sure there are people thinking to themselves, well, wait a minute, there are countries like Iran who force women to wear hijab and in fact punish women who don't wear hijab. And that's true. And there's countries like France, which are liberal democracies, who legislate against our right as Muslims to wear hijab. So we are not allowed to go to public university in a place like France wearing hijab. We have to choose between higher education and our hijab. We can't work in public sector jobs and be teachers and civil servants in a place like France. So what I welcome American women to do and our American sisters to say is, listen, we are against forcing women to wear hijab, but we are also, and we'll stand against policies like in a country like Iran, but we're also going to stand up to liberal democracies in France and say they do not get to tell Muslim women that they can't wear hijab. So that's what I want. I want to see the consistency in this conversation about what women wear, when we wear it, how we wear it. That should be my choice. If I decide tomorrow I don't want to wear hijab, then that's my choice, and that's what I do. And I think that's the problem that a lot of Muslim women have, is that there's a tendency to be inconsistent when it comes to us on this conversation about agency. I think you're trying to talk to me, Karita, and I can't hear you.
So,
I hear you now.
So civil rights legend Harry Belafonte said, "Defeat is not an option." What did it mean for Harry Belafonte to write the foreword for your book?
You know, for many people who don't know who Harry Belafonte is, Harry Belafonte was and is, I think he still carries that today, although he's not performing and he's no longer, an entertainer. I mean, he was an actor, he was a musician, and he was actually a confidant to the Dr. Martin Luther King. He was also a financier of the civil rights movement. He was probably one of the wealthiest Black men at the time of the civil rights movement, and really invested a lot of his resources into ensuring that the civil rights movement had the resources it needed to fight for voting rights and the Civil Rights Act, and to, of course, take care of some of the leaders who were sacrificing their income and sacrificing jobs to be on the front lines of the movement. Mr. Belafonte is alive today, and he's one of the few of that generation that is still here with us. And I know he's, seasoned and an elder, an ancestor of ours who's still here with us today. And he's also a mentor of mine. He's a founder of an organization called the Gathering for Justice. I have been a member of the Gathering for Justice for a really long time, and really have been able to sit at the feet of Harry Belafonte, and we call him Mr. Beat, to really listen to stories, to kind of string along a narrative that basically tells me that I'm connected to something bigger than myself, that I'm continuing on a legacy of people that came before me, that I'm not just out in this world in a chaotic, confusing world, which sometimes I do feel like I'm in, but to say, no, you are a baton has been passed to you and passed to your generation, and it is a responsibility of mine and others to pass that baton moving forward. So to have Mr. Belafonte write that forward to my book, and as you probably saw in the forward, he calls them Martin, Malcolm, and Marcus by first name, because he was on a first name basis with these folks. He didn't call him Dr. Martin Luther King. He was Martin to Harry B. And one thing also that I think, what he teaches us all the time is that, he sometimes when we come and sit at his feet and we say, why are we not winning? What's the problem here? Like, we are out here, we're tired, we face death threats, we get arrested, we leave our families. Like, what's the problem here? Like, why are we not winning? And he says to us all the time, this is a long-term fight, and you got to be ready to fight for fruits that you may not see of your labor. Like you are planting seeds today that maybe someone else in the future will benefit from. But if you're out here because you think you're going to get freedom and liberation in your lifetime, and you might, but you might not, and you have to be prepared for that. And that's something that's really has kept me moving. Another thing that Mr. B says in the forward that really meant something to me, especially when I first read it, and he says to us now and to to the readers and people who are going to be graced by reading Mr. B's words, you got to give people their flowers when they're here. We have a tendency in this country that somebody has to be assassinated, somebody has to die, and then later after they're assassinated or they're dead, we start saying, wow, that person did a great job. That person really had a great impact on, the American political landscape. Oh, that person did all these great things. But while that person was alive and that person was struggling and that person was leaving their families and sacrificing, sometimes we don't even have the chance for someone to say, hey, I see you. I appreciate what you're doing. I want to honor you while you are still here. And for Mr. Belafonte, watching a lot of his close friends get assassinated during the civil rights movement, he's moved by this idea of honoring people. He has honored and given awards to people. He has done, he sang special songs to people. He would go out and give a lot of, like different collectible items and stuff, because he knows that people are not going to be here forever, and we should be able to, celebrate them while they're here. And I thought that was another beautiful message that Mr. B was sending out to the world.
If you got to, along those lines, if you got to honor somebody who you feel hasn't gotten that recognition, who would you and why?
Oh my God, so many people. So many people. For example, in New York City, there was a recent campaign that was won here, and it was a campaign to relieve taxi drivers of these debilitating debts that New York City have put in place for them. And to see cab drivers, people that you kind of underestimate. You get in a cab in New York City and you don't actually look at this person and say they are a human being. They are a father. They are a brother of somebody. They are a son of somebody. But even more than that, they were advocates. They advocated for each other. They showed us here. And I would love to honor cab drivers, many of whom in New York City are immigrants, sacrificed, probably sold everything that they have to come to America to give their families a better life. I try as much as I can to honor my own mother. My mother is an immigrant to this country. My mother fled a military occupation to come to the United States so that her children would not be born in a state where my opportunities would have been limited. I'm grateful for my parents for choosing this country. And I think what's important about that in this context of the conversation is that people perceive the work that we do as civil rights and human rights activists here in America as anti-American. We're always going up against the United States government. We go up against law enforcement agencies and we criticize this nation on its policies. And people say, well, that's anti-American. And I say to people, it's actually quite the opposite. I love this country because this country gave my family an opportunity they would never have had. And if I didn't love this country, I would say, listen, the hell with it. Let them do what they do. And they've been doing it for 400 years. So I could, as long as I'm okay, I'm good. But no, I love this country enough to fight for it. I love this country enough to push it every day to reach to the ideals of what this nation was supposed to be. This nation was supposed to be one where we respected all people, that people can practice their religion freely, people can walk the streets safely, that we didn't come to a country to survive. We came here to thrive. Our parents would have probably figured out how to survive under a military occupation, but they didn't want to just survive. They wanted to thrive. They wanted to excel. They wanted to reach the highest points. And that's why they came to America. And so for me, this work, that we do is about, who for me personally, the way my barometer is, if you love this country, then you're doing everything that you can to make this country truly the greatest nation on earth. And that's something that I've had conversations about with Mr. Belafonte, who is someone that I honor. Mr. Belafonte at 94 years old still believes in this country. He tells me all the time, don't give up on America. And it brings tears to my eyes because he's seen a lot of things that I haven't experienced and seen. And if he's telling me not to give up on this country, then you better believe I'm not giving up on it. My parents have not given up on this country, even in the last 20 years as New Yorkers, as Muslims, and all that we've seen, the wars that have impacted our people, where we come from. We're tied to Palestinians in the diaspora in Iraq, in around the world. And my parents still say America's a great nation. America has potential. Like, don't give up on this nation. And so those are the people that I honor who instill this in me. And my mom and Mr. B being at the top of that list.
That's fantastic. You started your book with a discussion of the concept of jihad. That has kind of thinking of has a way to improve America. That term has come to mean a very different thing to Americans than the way you explain it in your book. How can we navigate terminology like that, where it has a valuable and positive religious or cultural meaning, and popular society ends up putting it in a very negative context?
Mm-hmm. Barbie, when I went to my editor and I said, I'm going to write a chapter that's called, what is my jihad? She was like, are you really going to do that? And I was like, yes, I'm going to do that. And I think that the reason why I did that, and it was a little provocative. And it was first of all, because one time in 2017, I got in big trouble for saying it in the right context, as a Muslim American and as also an Arabic speaker. Because the truth of the matter here is that the word jihad is not an English word. And so people who are English speakers and are not Arabic speakers, and you are not fluent in the Arabic language, you don't get to define what jihad is. Like, that's just not how this world works. Like, jihad is not a word that you can actually just, we spell it phonetically like Jihad, but it's not a word you could really find on Google in the right way, because it's actually a word that is written in the Arabic language. And as you know, the Arabic alphabet is different than the English alphabet. It's also a word that is very dear to Muslims, and it's very core and central to the faith tenets that we follow. Jihad means to struggle, and it means to struggle professionally, to struggle spiritually. It's really about every day you wake up in the morning, and what is it that you're going to do to struggle, to strive to be better than the day that you were before, to be more kind, to be more generous, to be better to your parents, better to your spouses, better to your community, better to the planet, better to animals. That is the point of jihad, is that every day you wake up, you got to struggle. And unfortunately, we live in a world where people don't want to struggle. They'd rather take the easy way out. They'd rather be mean to people. They'd rather walk over the homeless. They'd rather, litter on the ground instead of thinking about being better to our planet. Now, does jihad finally, after a line of about 100 things, does it also potentially mean to struggle in war? Yes, of course it does, because that is nature of life. All of us come from either cultures or nation states where at some point you are going to struggle in physical, in a physical way. But for someone to say to Muslims, that is what it means, and to take something that is on the bottom of the list and put it at the top of the list, it's not acceptable. And so my point of the jihad after I got in big trouble, and what that meant is that in 2017, I preached this at a big Muslim convention. Islamophobes took a video, they posted it online, and I went back and watched it, and I was like, yep, I sure did say that. But of course, to your point, Barbie, they defined it in their way. And so for them, jihad was the holy war, and I was calling for a holy war against the president of the United States of America. And my fellow Americans were calling for my arrest. They were saying that I should be arrested for treason, that I was not to be trusted. I needed to be detained. People said they need to hang me from a tree. I started getting death threats. I didn't leave the house I had to get private security. I mean, it was a whole situation, but I didn't want to walk away from it. So that right after I used that term and I was trending on Twitter for days, I called the Washington Post and I said, hey, everybody's talking about me without me. Would somebody like to hear what I have to say? And so the Washington Post gave me a Sunday, section in the opinion section, and I wrote about jihad. And all of a sudden, Barbie, right after I'm talking about jihad, everybody starts talking about jihad. Muslims came out of everywhere being like, finally, they felt like I created a safe space where people can actually preach their faith, that we could define our own faith in the way in which we practice our faith, that not someone who's not Muslim telling us what our Islam is, because Muslims don't do that to other people. We don't tell Jews how to worship. We don't tell the Christians how to worship, but all of a sudden, everybody wants to tell the Muslims what they believe. And so I'm glad that, I had to sacrifice a little bit. It was hard. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, these people were like, they wanted my head, but I was like, you know what? Whatever happens, happens. Just like Mr. B said, it was Marcus, Malcolm, and Martin, and they're not here today. And I said, if that's the way I'm going to go, I'm going to be proud to go that way. And so we are now in a state where people are more courageous to talk about jihad and what it means to us, and really take back other terminology that is close to us, that means something to us, that's valuable to us, and actually makes us better human beings. Like, you want us to do these things because you want us to be as great as possible.
Now, I understand that you became an activist after 9/11. Can you tell folks why that was a call to action for you?
You know, every time I tell people this, I mean, I wrote about this in my book as well. Like, listen, my whole dream was, I watched a movie that Michelle Pfeiffer starred in. That's how old I am. Called Dangerous Minds, and it was this movie that was like a big blockbuster movie where Michelle Pfeiffer was this like high school teacher, and she kind of was teaching in an inner city school, and her whole thing was like, I'm going to inspire these young Black and brown kids and these marginalized kids to express themselves through literature, and really just tell them that she loved them and embraced them, and really gave them this idea that they had so much potential in the world. As the world was telling them they were going to fail, Michelle Pfeiffer's character was about, you are somebody, you are going to be somebody. And so that was my dream. My dream was I was going to go back to my old high school, and my high school was predominantly Black and Latino. I was like one of the very few non-Black Latino kids in my school. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and love these kids, and I'm going to be a high school English teacher. I'm going to teach them poetry and writing. And that was like my whole big dream. Here I am, a college student. The horrific attacks of 9/11 happened. And all of a sudden, all the injustice that I was reading about, and although I kind of saw it happen before my eyes, I lived in a low income, mostly immigrant community. I went to a predominantly all Black high school. So I wasn't immune to injustice. I saw it happen, but it still felt a little far away from me personally. Then 9/11 happens, and all of a sudden, you know, I started seeing things that I saw in the movies. I saw FBI, NYPD intelligence, even agencies like NCIS that I never even heard of, descend on the community that I was born and raised in. I watched men be taken out of buildings, detained on the sidewalk. I remember one time there was a raid on a building where the men came out in a line, about maybe 20 of them. They laid them down on their bellies outside the building. I saw babies crying for their fathers from the windows. And I was like, this is not okay. And the thing that really hurt me the most about it, and that really radicalized me, and I was thinking to myself, these people are from Egypt. They're from Yemen. They're from, you know, Palestinians. These are Jordanians, you know, all kinds of people, kind of pan-Arab. And many of these people came to America to literally flee this type of treatment. Many of them live in dictatorships. Many of them live in police states. And they came to America because somebody told them this is not going to happen here. And here they were, people that had no connection to this horrific attack. They knew they had absolutely no affiliation. These were predominantly new immigrants, and all of a sudden they were somehow being suspect or blamed for something they had nothing to do with. And the way that I started was I was called to be a volunteer translator. So I'm very grateful that my parents taught me the Arabic language. So I'm fluent in the Arabic language, and I was a translator. That's all I knew. I didn't have any skills to give these people. And I went with wives and daughters to detention centers across the Northeast to find their loved ones. At the time, people forget how, you know, 20 years ago, we were still doing like phone book. Like there was no google.com, you know what I mean? Like, that's how, I mean, it sounds crazy. Like, I feel like I'm one of those, that generation that's in the middle, like before where there were computers, but there were still beepers, and cell phones weren't really a thing at that time. You were really bougie if you had a cell phone in like 2001. And for me, that was my, listen, I try to keep that skin routine going, but I'm a lot older than a lot of people think I am. But, you know, I just felt radicalized. There was something inside of me, that there was like a fire in me, that I was like, these people look like my brothers and father, or like uncles. Like, this is not okay. Like, I'm not going to just sit back while my own people, my neighbors, are being literally terrorized in our own community, where they ran away from the same treatment. Like, this is not okay. And I was also felt confident because I thought to myself, wait a minute, I'm an American and I don't carry any other passport. So it would be really hard for my country to deport me somewhere. So I guess I would have a little more courage than many of the people in my community who were either immigrants that did not have American citizenships, or people who were naturalized, who were worried that if they stood up and said and kind of spoke the truth, that the government would harass them and potentially denaturalize them. I didn't feel like I had that problem. My thing is like, you're going to have to deal with me because there's nowhere for you to send me. And so that was my kind of activism moment. I thought I was just going to be a volunteer in the beginning, but I just got too deep. I mean, I was like neck deep in it, and there's like, no going back from there. So I've been doing this work now for over 20 years, which is more than half my life. And I don't see an end in sight, unfortunately, at least not in my lifetime, to stop doing this work.
Do you see differences in the generations? You talk about your age and where you were in that. Between the people who are maybe an older generation from you, your generation, or younger people coming up into adulthood at this time, as a Muslim American, do they have a different experience?
You mean the generation that's like the one after me that's now?
Right, because that would, you were coming of age, a young adult or a new adult at the time of 9/11. Mm-hmm. And then for like your children, for example, the next generation, people mm-hmm. who grew up after that, how is the experience of being a Muslim in America different for those generations?
That particular generation you're talking about, and which is actually like, my children's generation. My son was born in 1999. My daughter was born in 2000, and my youngest is born in 2004. So, when 9/11 happened, my son was only like 2 years old, and my daughter was a little less than a year old. Mm-hmm. And so what I tell people all the time, this is the generation that breaks my heart the most. And I'll tell you why. Because these young people, they don't know a different America. They only know a post 9/11 America. They only know an America that tells them you don't belong here. They only know an America of president after president who engaged in policies, and particularly foreign policy. I mean, they are the age of the Iraq War. They are the age of the war in Afghanistan. They are the rise in Islamophobia in America. They are they saw the manifestation of years of unaddressed Islamophobia turn into Donald Trump and his administration. These are children that, I have a little different perspective in the sense that, before 9/11, I wasn't wearing hijab, and, my mom, we grew up in an immigrant community where everyone was like us. Their parents also, English was their second language. There was there was a type of belonging and safety that we felt in a community. Even when, we lived in a poor community, we lived in a community that had some gun violence, and, that was something we thought was normal that just happened in other places. But we lived a great life. We grew up, where our, neighbors' moms took care of us, where our friends' moms, where we would go places with them. We play at the park. And so I never really thought about it. Like, I never was like, oh, I'm a Muslim. Like, it was never a thing to think about, at least not for me. And then all of a sudden, 2001 comes along, and this horrific attack happens. And all of a sudden we go from being regular people living in a community to being suspect. Like, there were literal people who stopped talking to their neighbors after the horrific attacks of 9/11. I remember being with my mom at a supermarket like 3 days later, and just people looking at my mom. Like, I was so horrified by it. And I remember my mom was wearing like a little cardigan, and she started holding her cardigan. Like, she was so uncomfortable in a supermarket that she was going to for 25 years. Like, I was like, what is happening in this world? So our kids, and that's why, it's important for us to do this type of, education, and especially empowerment programs and inclusive programs for young people, particularly young Muslims, to say to them, listen, this is not how it's supposed to be. It may seem like it is how it is, but it's not supposed to be like this. Like, this is not a country where you should be afraid to tell people that you're Muslim. I mean, a lot of the things that happened post 9/11 is women took hijabs off. Little, younger girls who were kind of exploring their identity with hijab took their hijabs off. I was encouraged many times to take my hijab off for security and safety reasons. We have kids, and I'm sure you come across them in Anaheim. It'll be a kid named Muhammad. All of a sudden you ask him what his name is, and he's trying to tell you his name is Mo. No, your name is Muhammad, but you don't want to tell people your name is, Muhammad. A lot of kids, like there's kids in my neighborhood, Nadal was Nick to everybody. Like, people were trying to figure out ways to fit in. Even people thought I did that, that didn't know me. They used to be like, okay, what's your name? And I'll be like, Linda. They'd be like, but what's your Muslim name? And I'm like, I really was born with this name. Like, my mom wrote this on my birth certificate. But people, again, because of the experiences that they had, this generation at the beginning was really trying to hide who they were. because they were so afraid of what they saw. I mean, there are studies that actually in the state of California, there was a study that's been done twice already around bullying in schools. And they were asking a pretty significant sample of Muslim students in public school about bullying. And it's astonishing, they're like, it's something over 50% of Muslim children have experienced some form of bullying over the course of their time in public school. And it's like, and then mind you, that's California, not to say that California is liberal from the top to the bottom, but just in general, when you think about a state like California, imagine what kids are experiencing if they're Muslims in Georgia or Muslims in Texas or Muslims in Mississippi. So yeah, again, I think this generation, particularly those born after 2001, have really struggled with identity issues.
How can allies best support the Muslim community? Where do we start? Like, what do we need to do?
I think this is, I feel like this is an example of something. I think, I see people in the comments that I actually know from California. I see Rashad, I see folks like Laith and Russia and many others. And it's important for people in the community to see themselves. And, for me, when I'm watching a program or I go to a local library and I see, a woman of color author who comes in, she may not be a Muslim, but there's something about that aligns with you. There's an experience there that I can share. I think this type of programming, to see someone like me who's a Muslim woman who wears hijab, who gets to kind of speak to a community. People say, wait a minute, this library sees me. This library is in my community, and this library is creating a conversation that I could be a part of, one that dignifies who I am and, reflects my experiences, maybe as an immigrant myself or a child of immigrants, someone who may be Arab or a Muslim, or of course you could be Arab and Muslim. There's a lot of, kind of nuance to our community. And so this is kind of a start. I think oftentimes I tell people it's the simple things. One time, sometimes, like for me personally, like even if, you're walking into a supermarket and a Muslim lady's behind you, holding a door for a Muslim sister to say, I respect you, I'm going to do, things that are just basic acts of kindness that we would do for anybody else. Oftentimes I feel like Muslims are just trying to, like, there's a saying we have in Arabic that says, and it's very hard to translate in English, but I'm going to try. It's basically like the Muslims are kind of walking against the wall. Like, we're trying not to bump into anybody. We're trying not to make too much trouble. We're trying to go in and out without, disrupting the spaces that we're in. And I don't want that for Muslims. I want a Muslim woman to walk into a supermarket and see you both and say, hello, good morning, good afternoon, how are you doing? These are the things that people think solidarity or allyship requires some sort of like active activism, or like showing up to a rally, or, something of that sort. No, sometimes it's just looking someone with eye contact, just looking someone in the eye and saying, I hope you have a great day. Be safe out there. That means that when people do that to me, it means more to me than I could even explain here. I just think to myself, wow, that person sees me as one human being. Like I was worthy enough for someone to look me in the eye and say, I'm going to give you a greeting. That's where we start. One of the mantras that we have in the movement work, and you probably have heard this before, is the young activists will get up and they do this long chant, but it ends with, we must love and protect one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. And I always say to people, how are you going to protect me and love me if you don't even know me? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like what you're saying, like one day something bad might happen to Muslims in America, or, to, I don't know, to Asian people, or God knows, because we've went on a long trajectory of bad things happening to a lot of different communities. And I always say to people, like, how are you going to just sit here and say you're going to protect me? Do you know my name? Do you even know who your next door neighbor is? Do you know who the person that sits in the cubicle 5 cubicles down from you? Sometimes people live in apartment buildings. They have no idea who lives on their floor. What if something really bad happens? Like, how are we going to show up for one another? We saw COVID. COVID was a great example. And I'll tell you this, when COVID happened, I lived on a street. I just moved recently, but I lived on a street that was, a lot of seniors lived on my street. I was actually renting a house for my board chair at the time, who also was a senior. And I thought to myself, what are these seniors going to do? How are they going to go get their groceries? How are they going to go to the pharmacy? Like, especially in the beginning when nobody really knew what was going to be open, what wasn't going to be open. And I decided, I literally found like a little pack of postcards in my house, little index cards. And I went and wrote my number and my name on it and said, if you need anything, this phone is on 24 hours. I'm happy to go grocery shopping. I'm happy to pick up your medication, whatever you need, just call this number. And I slipped it in people's mailboxes. I slipped it under the door where I could. And I thought to myself, look, I can't help everybody, But guess what? I could help my neighbors. I could help the lady down the street, across the street, next to my house. And that's the kind of allyship and solidarity that I think is missing. It's not just activism, like I came to a rally for refugees and that's allyship. No. Do you know the neighbor who may be a refugee that lives next door to you? That's more important to me than you showing up to a rally for 25 minutes with a sign. I mean, that's also important, but those individual acts are what we need right now to really build the kind of nation that we all would be proud to live in.
On the other side of that, you started talking a little bit about showing up at a rally. What would you say to young people who do want to be part of the movement, but don't know how to move on into that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the question that I get asked all the time. It's one of the most important questions because people will say, listen, I want to be active. I care about things too, but I don't even know where to start. How do I even know there's a rally somewhere? I mean, sometimes people don't even know things are going on. The one thing that I will say is I'll say three things. Number one is follow the right people on social media, follow local civil rights organizations, look it up, community-based organizations. Anaheim, I bet you that someone already crowdsourced the list somewhere, figure out, who are the activists that you've seen in your community, even following some of the national activists who, by the way, oftentimes do have ties to local communities and you will get some information from them. But more important than that, as you're researching community-based organizations, the way I started in this work is I was a translator, but I was affiliated with an organization as a volunteer. And so for me, it was the Arab American Association of New York, which exists today. And I was honored to be able to serve as its executive director from 2005 to 2017. And it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And I started as a volunteer. Who would have thought that a few years later, I would be their executive director? So find a community-based organization in your community and one that aligns with your passion. Do you care about addressing homelessness? Do you care about, refugees? Do you care about, organizing around racial justice? Do you care about even, people who care about things like climate justice, or you care about, breast cancer research? I mean, it doesn't matter to me what you care about. We need people who care about different things and show up and say and make a commitment. You know what? Every month I only have 4 hours to give, and be consistent about it. And I promise you, once you are aligned with an organization and are doing work that you love, somehow, some way it becomes something that fulfills you. Like you actually want to be there and you want to do that work. And that's how I started. I started as a volunteer. I committed time and hours that I had to something that I really believed in. And then from there, I was connected to people, and you meet people, and then you get connected to another organizer and another activist. And then this one invites you to a meeting. And next thing you know, your schedule's full. You don't have a Saturday or a Sunday or an evening for yourself. Now, some people are, you don't want to get to it. You do want some time for yourself. And other people, that's what they're looking for. They're looking to fill their life. My social life and my professional life are the same life. And I love that because my friends, my dearest friends that I love from the bottom of my heart, are also my colleagues. And so being in these types of relationships where we can have joy together, where we can, celebrate together, but we also struggle together, we organize together, and we sacrifice together. And that really has been a fulfilling part of the last 20 years of my life. So it sounds hard and you're like, I don't know how to get there. Trust me, you just need to find one person, one organization, and it really just kind of goes from there.
Have you seen us move forward since 2020?
So, one of the things that disappointed me post 2020, and one of the things about me is I am absolutely a nonpartisan organizer. I don't care about political parties. I'm not loyal to political parties. I don't like Democrats or Republicans. I don't like the third party people. I don't like any politics. I know that we have to do it and engage in it, which, as you saw in my book, and I'm known to be a political strategist and a political organizer, but it really is centered on organizing power politically for the people, and really specifically the most marginalized people. And since 2020, what really has hurt my heart is that we got rid of a man that really symbolized, every ill that this country has kind of, been plagued with from the days of its founding, and so all of a sudden in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, everyone was like, oh my goodness, racism, sexism, the patriarchy's here. And I'm just kind of like, where the hell were you all? Like, we've been here. Like, women still don't get paid the same as men for the same work. women still fighting for reproductive rights, you know, for the last 30 years, you know, even after, you know, abortion rights, you know, were given, you know, 50 years ago. I mean, we're still in a country that fights for voting rights for particular communities and are fighting voter suppression. You know, we still have police murders and vigilante murders that have happened way before there was ever Donald Trump. So I was kind of one of those people post the election that was kind of like, okay, I'm going to be nice about this. Welcome to our world. You know, if this is where, if now all of a sudden you're fired up and you want to fight the patriarchy and you want to fight racism, let's do this. And that just means more people for the movement. So I was very welcoming in this movement. And then 2020 happens. And so we're doing, as you saw, a lot of resistance. 2017, 2018, 2019. I mean, the people, as my colleagues would say, the people were outside and the streets were hot. And the streets were hot every day. I mean, it was Friday, Monday, Saturday morning, Saturday night. I was protesting somewhere. I mean, the people were in the street. People were at the borders. I mean, it was a lot going on. And then all of a sudden in 2020, Donald Trump is defeated politically as an individual, and he's no longer the president of the United States of America. And then then I start looking around. I'm like, what happened to the streets? The streets ain't hot. And now we did have some, you know, hot streets in the summer, of course, post the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, of course. You know, those were really important moments, and they will be important moments in our history. But generally and relatively speaking, comparison in the last 4 years, it's been hard to see some of our friends that came out during those 4 years who saw the defeat of Donald Trump as almost that we're on the other side of it, kind of. And so the whole concept of going back to brunch. And unfortunately, everything that we fought under Donald Trump is still here. You know, we have the Remain in Mexico policy. You know, you all saw the Haitian migrants at the border, I mean, in the thousands. And these are people who have a right to asylum. We have a right to process these people and to treat them with dignity and assess their opportunities to live in this country just like everybody else, you know, and our country did not do that. I was at the border and I watched, for example, families, the United States government decides who your immediate family is. So when we were in the processing centers, we would see some elderly folks and we'd say, how did you get here? You know, how did you come all the way by yourselves? And they'd say, we didn't come by ourselves. We're the grandparents. We came with our children and our grandchildren. And the United States government decides that your grandmother is not your immediate family. So they separate the grandmother from the family. And now this elderly woman who only speaks French Creole is trying to figure out how to navigate her life because our country in America decides that grandma is not part of your family. When we come from cultures where my grandma is the boss of the family, and you better believe that she's the most important person in our family, and God forbid you try to separate it, or God rest their souls, both my grandmother would not go and be separated. But anyway, that's what the United States government are doing. And let's remember, Donald Trump is not the president. The Remain in Mexico policy. Right now we are in a pandemic. People don't have jobs. You know, people are suffering economically. And here we are telling people, we deferred your student loans, but we got you on February 1st. Go find those payments because we're about to start that back up again. I mean, the way in which we devastatedly kind of removed ourselves from Afghanistan in such a half, excuse my language, I'm going to actually not use a bad word, but in a not a strategic way. And now the people of Afghanistan are going to continue to suffer as they have suffered for the last, 20 years. I mean, the lack of commitment to healthcare for all people in America. I mean, how many people die just because they don't have access to healthcare in freaking America? Like, this is the United States of America, folks. The police killings. Right now we're working on a case where on Saturday morning, the Elizabethtown, Kentucky Police Department killed a 28-year-old man who was sleeping in his car. And somebody decided that a man sleeping in his car after a storm, mind you, because remember, there was a storm in Kentucky, stayed late at his factory, drove home, got tired, didn't want to continue driving, parks in an apartment complex. Someone calls and says, oh, suspicious black guy sleeping in the apartment complex parking lot. Cops come, startle the guy, altercation happens. Guy gets back in his car. He said, I'm not getting arrested for not doing, I didn't do anything wrong. And of course, what do the cops do? Pump 13 clips into his car and he is dead now. So these things are still happening. And the things that we were kind of outraged about under the Trump administration are still here because Trumpism is still here. Donald Trump was a reflection of an ideology. He was not just one bad human being. He was leveraging the ills that already existed here in the United States. So again, I feel, hopeful. I'm an organizer. I believe, again, as Mr. B says, in the potential of this nation. And that sometimes means that we're going to have to go through the valleys before we get to the mountaintop. And right now, I do believe in 2020 that we're still in the valley. And it is kind of the call to action is to say, you know what, it doesn't matter what political party is in power. We're going to not be bystanders. We're going to be consistent because our people are worth it. And we're going to keep building a country that we can all be proud of.
Do you say you say we can be proud of civil rights icon legend John Lewis spoke about the soul of America. Can the soul of America be redeemed? You said you have very positive feelings about America, but we're also, like you said, in a valley.
You know, there was a beautiful quote by Coretta Scott King that actually specifically talked about redeeming the soul of America. And she, I'm paraphrasing, but she basically said, it is women who can redeem the soul of America. She really believed in the power of women's leadership. And it was a mantra that we really followed through as we were organizing the Women's March on Washington, which is until today, the largest single day demonstration in American history. And I'm very proud of that day and proud of the kind of precedents that we set for women running for office around the country. As you know, in 2018, which was the first midterm election after the 2016 election, you know, more women were elected to Congress than ever before. And that's and to state legislators and to city councils and to school boards across the country. I really believe that we are the soul of America. And that's the thing when I say to people, when they say people give up, and I'm like, I mean, are you giving up your soul? Like, what are you doing exactly? You know, sometimes we have to manifest what it is that we want for the country that we live in. And sometimes that's going to require for a determined few to decide that we're going to dedicate everything that we have. And we have these people in every generation. And I think in every generation, as you kind of move forward, yes, we find ourselves in valleys sometimes, but the valley is still a little wider and a little greener than the valleys that came maybe 50 years before. We definitely have seen progress in America. And so this progress that we've seen over time is kind of the pathway that Mr. B says there is potential here. Because if there was no potential, that we would, God forbid, still be, you know, I don't know, we would still have indentured servants and enslaved people. I don't know. That, you know, that white women got the right to vote, but it took another couple of decades to get Black women the right to vote. I mean, and that's all things we should be ashamed of, in the sense that why would one group of women get the right to vote and another not? But it still shows a trajectory that there has been progress as people have organized and sacrificed moving forward. So I believe in this country. I really do. And I believe in people like us. And I believe in my heart that America is a country of a silent, good, well-intentioned, you know, kind, passionate majority that is just happens to be silent right now. And sometimes it's because people don't know how to show up. They don't know where to move in. And the last thing that I'll say also, just because I kind of compare, you know, my upbringing in America to how I watched my family, like back in Palestine, in the village that my family's from. And this is also, I learned it, believe it or not, through Black culture and other kind of immigrant experiences. We grew up, you know, our families grew up in communities and neighborhoods and in villages where, you know, they say a village raises a child, right? And it's not actually just the saying, it's actually the truth. Like this, like, and even in Palestine under occupation, you put your child in the street to play and you don't have to worry about them because somebody's watching them up the street, down the street. Like there's some sort of community there. You know, we in Palestine, we don't have neighbors that go hungry. That's just not how it works. Like, you are never going to go to bed if your neighbor is struggling or your neighbor became a widow or something to that effect, someone's sick. You know, people in the neighborhood will line up to go visit the sick in their community. America has a different way and different type of culture where we kind of are taught individualism. We are taught that every man, woman, and person for themselves. If you got a job, you can pay your mortgage, your kids got health care. Don't worry about everybody else. Everybody else got to figure it out for themselves. And that's not really how it is in any other part of the world. No other part of the world says everybody figures it out. There's some sense of community, some sense of responsibility for the other. And for some reason, we haven't learned that in America, which is probably why we have the most billionaires in the world. Like people who will literally accumulate billions and billions of dollars when we have 40% of children in America live under the poverty line. Like, how does that even logically make sense? And so the trying to figure out, you know, how do we help to cultivate a culture in America that says my neighbor is just as important as me, and that I'm not going to go to bed with my neighbor hungry. I'm not going to just walk over homeless people. I'm not going to allow for my country to set up a public school system where based on tax revenue is how much resources a school gets. Like when I tell people that in other parts of the world, even in Europe, people are like, stop it. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, it's based on property taxes. Like whatever community pays the most taxes, that's the school that has the best after school programs, the best swimming pools, the courtyard, the basketball courts, the best textbooks that are from actually 2020 versus teaching kids a book from 2008, which is now outdated. So when I tell people that in other countries, and I've had the privilege of traveling the world, they're like, you can't be serious. That's not what they do. I said, absolutely. That's what we do in America. And also thinking about, that we have the potential to say no to mass incarceration. Why the hell do we hold 1 out of every 4 prisoners around the world? And for people, this is a library. It's about knowledge. China has 1 billion people. India has 1 billion people. We only have 1/3 of the population of India. So why is it that we hold 1 out of every 4 prisoners in the entire world? 25% of the world's prison population is here in the United States of America. Does somebody not think that that's a pretty bad formula, that it sounds like something's wrong here? There's something fundamentally wrong about how is it possible population-wise that we hold the most prisoners? And when we look into it, these are the things that a lot of Americans don't understand. It's that we have an economy in America that is built off of prisons, that is built off the oppression of people who, a country that doesn't give people second chances, that we just don't practice what we kind of preached as the ideals of this nation. And so anyway, having said all the bad things, there's still potential for more of the silent majority to wake up and say, you are right, Linda. This is absolutely outrageous. What am I doing with myself? I want to be able to tell my grandkids when they ask me, why was this happening while I was still alive? That you want to be able to say, you know what? I showed up. I supported people on the front lines. I educated myself. I showed up when I could. I interjected on Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners. I debated people in my family. I provided them with, hey, read this book, read this article. I used my Facebook and my social media in a responsible manner to share accurate information, to at least take the responsibility off myself that I'm not just, putting out misinformation, which unfortunately sometimes happens. So I just feel like we are the potential, and we are the hope. And I do believe that there's a lot of people that are like us out there. They're just trying to find their way in.
Well, I notice we're coming up on the end of our hour. I'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us what you're doing next. You were telling us a little bit about it before the program, and I'd love to hear you tell us about that.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part. You went out for me a little bit.
I'd love to hear what your next projects are, and share that with our community.
Absolutely. So as I was telling my friends earlier before we started the live, I do have 2 more book projects coming out. Maybe there'll be more in the future, but this is what I know about right now. I do have a young adult book that's coming out in October of 2022. I really want to interject on a conversation with young people, and I want to speak to them and meet them where they're at. And I hope this next book that's really about solidarity and activism and about being your whole unapologetic self, regardless of who you are, will inspire some more young people to get into the work of organizing and activism. I also have a children's book, got to talk to the even little ones and, radicalize them at a young age to also make them believe that they too are powerful, that they too can engage in solidarity and showing up, even as little people. Of course, you can follow me on social media so you can kind of keep up with, unfortunately, oftentimes the injustice in the world. And usually I try to give you something to do about it, and give you action items and places to go and things to sign and things like that. You could also follow 2 organizations that I work with, Until Freedom. Until Freedom specifically focuses on issues of criminal justice reform, and we work on a lot of police violence cases across the country that also are about systemic change. So how do we take local cases and try to build a campaign around it that maybe has some legislative policy changes, as in the case of Breonna Taylor and banning the no-knock warrants, and also empower change. It starts with the letter M. So it's not empower, it's empower. Change, which is an organization that builds the political power of Muslim communities. We do voter engagement, voter registration, kind of political empowerment and training. And we'd love for you to join us in some of our trainings. They're not just for Muslims. You will just be trained by fabulous and well-skilled, trained Muslim organizers. So that's Empower Change and Until Freedom. So that's how you can find me online.
I think we have one more question. If you were to add another chapter with everything that happened since your book was published, what would you tell us in that chapter?
I think that if I could add another chapter, I would actually write a chapter about Breonna Taylor. And I would use Breonna Taylor, a story, to kind of bring us back to a conversation, number one, about women's leadership, about Black women in particular, and kind of the ways in which Black women throughout my book and also in my life have kind of inspired me and protected me and really have shown me the most solidarity in a way that is so radical in its love that I can't really describe it into words. And I think I've had time to reflect on it and could have probably came up with something for a chapter. And also to use the story of Breonna Taylor to really emulate what solidarity looks like. I think, myself and my colleagues at Until Freedom, we moved during a global pandemic, left our families, our senior parents in New York City and went to live in Louisville, Kentucky. And if you're from New York City, trust me when I tell you culture shock when you get to a place like Louisville, Kentucky. And Louisville, Kentucky isn't even the boonies of the boonies. There are other places that are even more rural than Kentucky. But even for us as New Yorkers, it was a culture shock. But that's what solidarity looks like. You sacrifice, you get up and you say to and you're ready to fight for somebody that you don't know. And Breonna Taylor was not somebody that we knew personally. But what we did know is that Breonna deserved to live. And she deserved to live as an EMT worker that was sacrificing her life to take sick people to the hospital in the beginning of probably the worst global pandemic that we've seen in 100 years. And so I would have wrote a kind of my experience, with the family of Breonna Taylor and the story of Breonna Taylor, and using that as a way to inspire people to fight for somebody in a way that requires sacrifice. It's not just, I'm just going to, go to a rally and say justice for Breonna Taylor, but what does it mean to really fight for a family that you don't know, and for them and to make them your family eventually by building really deep relationships. So Breonna Taylor is in my young adult book because, I was going to honor her and honor her life, not just as a Black woman who was murdered by the police, but as someone who should inspire young generations of women, particularly those that want to go into the healthcare field. So yeah, she'll be in my next book.
Excellent. Well, we thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking your time. And we appreciate you so much. We appreciate you. We loved your book, and we hope, guys, if you haven't read it yet, please get the book, read it, check it out here at Anaheim, and, please do so.
Absolutely. It's fabulous. And I hope you've been seeing the comments that have been scrolling on the screen. A lot of people appreciate what you're saying and what you're doing. And we're so glad to be able to have this opportunity to have a conversation with you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I look forward to one day meeting you in person and visiting you all at the Anaheim Public Library. And please, folks, support libraries. I was telling them that libraries are such an important part of our communities. It's part of my growing up. I wouldn't be who I am today. I probably wouldn't even be an author today if it wasn't for all the many times that I sat in a corner of a bookstore, that I hung out with my local librarians here in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, who loved me and invested in, sharing with me things that I should read. They were the ones that would be like, okay, next time you come, they would have a stack of books and say, these are the books that you should read. So I appreciate you, Barbie, and I appreciate you, Karita, for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.